Yama, all you mob out there. My name's Gavy Duncan. I work for Darkinjung Local Aboriginal Land Council. I'm the Senior Tourism Education Officer with Darkinjung. I've been associated with the council for a very long time, well over 20 years I suppose, and I'd like to introduce you to Darkinjung Ngura. It's a program that I hope that you can join us each week, a blog on Darkinjung country and Darkinjung history. So we'll be visiting lots of different places all over the coast each week, and we hope that you can join us and, you know, come online and make some comments and join in as such. Through this time that we're going through at the moment, you know, I think it's good that we touch base and keep that connection with country. My country bloodline is that I'm a Gomeroi person. I was born in the northwestern town of Mourning in New South Wales, from a strong Aboriginal community. I'm also Mandandangi bloodline, and I've also got a Wabba bloodline in my family history as such, down here on the coastal region. But I identify as a Gomeroi person and foremost as such. And here in Darkinjung country, our family has had a very close connection here to these lands, to the point where our families were involved in setting up what is now known as the Darkinjung Local Aboriginal Land Council. And this started around 1983 when Neville Wran, who was the Premier of New South Wales at the time, decided to give Aboriginal people land rights. And this happened in the event because of you know, Aboriginal people for so long we've been treated totally unfairly in this country, in our own lands as such. Land rights was always an important part of Aboriginal people, to get back something of what was traditionally ours and what is still considered traditionally our country as such. So Darkinjung has a long history there, like other land councils in New South Wales. And I think land is something that not is that physically important, but spiritually and religiously and, you know, physically, that we have those connections. It's important to preserving and protecting who we are as Aboriginal people in regards to our identity and strengthening that identity, and especially with our children, because there's a lot of disconnection out there today after, you know, contact period as such, and where it had a massive effect on Aboriginal society. So I hope you can join us here on this program in Darkinjung Ngura, and hope that you can join us on this journey. So I'd like to say Yama, and, you know, to this beautiful place here, as you can see. This is Pearl Beach, and straight across the Dirrabin, which is the traditional name for the Hawkesbury River here. And as you can see, there's Lion Island, which is an island that lays at the mouth of the river. And on the other side of the river itself is the Gadigal peoples. So that is the Gadigal peoples' lands of the Eora people or Eora nation of the Sydney mobs. And across here, across the way, is the Darkinjung people, Darkinjung Awabba peoples as such. And I guess being here right now in this spot, I've decided to, you know, start from here as such, because back in 1788, when Europeans first arrived in Australia in the Gadigal people's lands, they rode here right at this beach at Pearl Beach 5 weeks after they landed in Gadigal country. And Philip came up here in a rowboat, or longboat as they called it, and they met many of our people here on Pearl Beach as such. That would have been probably one of the first physical meetings between early Europeans and Aboriginal people. They even commented that, you know, our people were so friendly as such then. Naturally, our people had no idea who these strangers were and where they came from. And we interpreted those early Europeans as being possums running up masts on their tall ships at the time as such. And also our people called them Wanda, which means in language means spirit or ghost as such, because of their fair skin. But physically, when they met here on Pearl Beach, they found that these people weren't spirits or ghosts as such, and that were just human beings like ourselves. But the early Europeans naturally came from a different advanced, well, so-called advanced society as such, that we still, as Aboriginal people, lived in the natural moment. As such, when we believed that our great father Bayami, our creator, and our mother Yi had given us from the beginning of time. And this is what early Europeans didn't understand about Aboriginal people. Philip asked our people here, they said, "Where do you people come from?" And he said every time he asked the question, he said our people would just point to the sky. And he had no idea of what this meant. And he did this and asked the same question to a lot of Aboriginal people. And every time he asked the question, they all just pointed to the sky, which later he asked Aboriginal people, when I asked that question of where you come from, they just point to the sky world. And it was explained to him about our religious belief as Aboriginal people that we came from the morning star. We say that life itself came from the Mirrabooka. Mirror means stars and Booka means river. It means the river of life and the Milky Way. And that's what we believe as Aboriginal people, as our great creator stepped down on the sacred mountain of Mount Yango, which is about 30 kilometres west of here. And it's a big story that relates to the 7 language groups of our region in our area here as such. And so Pearl Beach might be significant to early Europeans, but it's been a significant place to our people for tens of thousands of years. So having that first contact period here with Philip on this beach, from here they rowed out into Broken Bay, here at the gateway to the Central Coast. The gateway, as I'm talking about, is actually Broken Bay. As you can see from looking out into the ocean, between the two spread headlands that you have on the Gadigal people's headland to the south, and we have this Budai headland here, Budai National Park, which is associated with the Darkinjung people and Darkinjung country as such. This is where Philip came through the headland here of Broken Bay, the gateway to the Central Coast, and they sailed through here up into what is now called Brisbane Water, that we called Narara in language as such, and then they went back to the Gadigal people's lands. When Philip explored this area, the notion is that the British were looking at settling here in this region here on Broken Bay, or Gosford as it's known today. But they found that the waters were too shallow, and there's a lot of sandbars across the bay here as such, so there's no way that they could get big ships up through these ocean bays as such. And so they went back, and that was basically the start of colonisation, when they decided to go into Mourning, which is the traditional name for Sydney Harbour, on the Gadigal people's lands. They came into what is called Broken Bay, or Ettalong as such, and then went further into what is now known as Gosford, which traditional name is called Narara, and which is now a suburb here on the Central Coast. And so there existed different clan groups as such in Aboriginal nation groups, and so different clan groups would have met this party that came up here. And because Europeans never saw any materialised things like houses and fences and that type of modernism, and but our people live, like I said, in the moment, in the naturalness of everything, because our culture is based on what the family kingship system is given to us by our father and mother creators from the beginning of time as such. So we didn't need to invent the wheel or other things. Life for us was very much totally connected to the land itself, and everything we see around us is what we call our ancestral beings. Our ancestral beings, what are the plants, the animals, the birds, the insects, the waterways, all the things of nature itself, which we religiously name our children after. And once you start understanding that religious story of our people and connection, you start to understand Aboriginal people and who we are a lot more. And I guess before that contact period as such, our people lived in a very much a strong communities, strong communal communities which ran their societies on a very balanced way between men and women in our communities. Women have their dream and stories, men have their dream and stories. Women have their language, men have their language. Women have their songs, we have our songs. They have their sights, we have our sights as men. But then we have common things we share together as men and women. This was really hard for early Europeans to understand, this kingship structure or system that existed for tens of thousands of years, and it still exists to this very day. And when over time, when you stand here at a place called, Pearl Beach as such, or named by Europeans, this place, it makes you really think in regards to what has happened within those 230 years of colonisation here in Australia. By standing on this very spot as such and think of, I guess, the mass destruction and that as Aboriginal people have felt through colonisation, and how from this very spot again has affected tens of thousands of Aboriginal people to this day, to the stolen generations, to the dismantling of Aboriginal lands, the dismantling of Aboriginal family groups, the dismantling of our connections as such, because it did a lot of damage along the way. And even today, our people are still recovering. We're still in that recovery mode. 200 years may seem a lot to Europeans as such, but it's just a drop in the ocean to us, and the amount of time that our people have lived with these natural environments as such. So we say that we belong to the land and the land doesn't belong to us, because it's a spiritual thing that we have this deep religious connection with everything around us that gives us life as such. And I think after colonisation and the breakdown of Aboriginal society as such, significantly, our people were put onto missions and reserves in the late 1800s, and these were supposedly to protect and preserve what was left of pure Aboriginal culture as such. And they give that explanation of Arnhem Land and how the people in the north and of Australia still have their land, still have their language pretty much intact as it was 200 years ago, which naturally, if Europeans came here through the north, we would be reversed as such, and we would naturally have a full access with our land and full connection to our languages, customs, traditions. And naturally, the biggest city in Australia was established just over the river here in Sydney today. So with this journey, it'll take us on a journey of discovery, but a journey of wisdom and knowledge, and over the series that we will produce and give you. And I hope that you can join in with us too as we go along on this journey. Now, land rights came into being in 1983, and it was set up where there's over 100 now land councils throughout New South Wales. These have particular areas or boundaries as such. They're not always on tribal boundaries, but they are boundaries when the land rights was set up, that each community would have had to set up a land council, because it actually, under the Land Rights Act, we get 7% of the land tax that is given to New South Wales land councils as such. And it's held by a government registrar, and the government registrar holds the Land Rights Act as such, which all the councils abide by that act. And then we were given so much funding each year to actually keep the businesses of land councils alive as such with communities. then members of the Aboriginal community become members of these land council or the land council networks. We have what we call regional land councils and state land councils, and we have the New South Wales state or body as such that is representative of different people from different regional areas in New South Wales that make up that board as such. And so land rights for a long time since colonisation has been fought very strongly by our people. Even the times when back in 1937 when the first protests in public in Sydney were called the Day of Mourning. William Cooper, who was one of those people who held that meeting or gathering or protest in Sydney at the time, fighting for citizens' rights. So our people were incarcerated for well over 75 years here in New South Wales until we had some sort of freedom when Gough Whitlam came to power as the Prime Minister at the time. And then the breakdown of all those particular laws that were against our people, and basically that tied us down. And we couldn't talk our language, we couldn't dance our dances, we couldn't sing our songs, we couldn't pass on that cultural knowledge and history to our children. So it did a lot of damage. And I think the government has to take responsibility for this. And this is a long time that our people have been crying out for equal rights and justice, and land rights is just one of those things. And the network is really strong right across New South Wales. I guess they have the biggest community membership of an Aboriginal organisations across the state as such, and they are the cultural authority too. Now, you might have heard of Aboriginal stakeholders, or you might have heard of traditional owners. As an Aboriginal person, I believe we are all traditional owners. Every single one of us who are recognised as Aboriginal by Aboriginal community are traditional owners. But the New South Wales Land Rights Act keeps a list of traditional owners, and this gives them some claim in regards to their particular area by recognising or being recognised by the government as such as a traditional owner. And so this might lead to native title in other areas, which is another subject altogether in regards to Aboriginal land rights. But New South Wales, I think land rights is something very unique in Australia, where we are given so much percentage of land tax, and that is given to Aboriginal people. And part of that is that we can claim any empty, unoccupied Crown land. But it's still, the government creates a lot of barriers there with our people in claiming this land, because there's always a lot of protests in regards to Aboriginal people that make claim on certain lands and areas, because you've got local governments, you've got local non-Aboriginal community groups and others that oppose Aboriginal land rights as such. And that's because of the nature of money itself, because money is a big thing today in society. And so today as Aboriginal people, when we are given land rights finally, and we claim certain lands that are Crown, but then on the western ranges as such, or on the other side of the Great Divide, on the western side, Aboriginal groups out there don't have a lot of Crown land. They have a lot of public purpose land, or land that is leased for crops and that type of thing, cattle and sheep and those type of industries. So that's been automatically extinguished as such, that we cannot claim land where those things exist. And where the coastal land councils as such are very lucky in a way that they have so much land that is considered Crown or owned by the Crown. Traditionally it was owned by the Queen of England as such, or the King of England, by the naming of Crown land, because naturally the Queen is still the head of state in Australia. The Crown is now converted to the Australian government as such, but the Queen still is the head of state. Really, when you look at Australia itself, we are still tied under the British system. We're not a truly independent country, and that's something that we're not an independent land as such. Until the head of state is being taken out from the Australian government and institution as such, then we can truly become an independent country. And so land rights was something that's very powerful, because it gives our people hope. It gives our people the responsibility again of bringing back our culture as how strong it was from the beginning as such. And land is what we say is our mother. Land is everything. That is what we call ourselves as Aboriginal people. So land is very precious in that way. So on behalf of the board and also our CEO of Darkinjung Local Aboriginal Land Council, we'd like to say, come with us on this journey, and we'll take you through a little bit of Aboriginal history through Aboriginal eyes.